We are live.
Wow, what is up, fight fans? UFC Vegas 16 is in the books. We are live here on MMA Weekly for the post-fight press conference coming your way in just a couple of minutes. The main event winner and Dana White will speak to our audience worldwide as well as all of us here and possibly both fighters from the main event. But what a main event it was. I'm Jim Grieshaber. Call me Gries. Jeff Cain, 18-year veteran of MMA Weekly, is here with me. And Jeff, man, what a main event between the Joker, Jack Hermansson, and the Italian Dream, Marvin Vettori. I have so much to say about this entire fight card. We were down to 8 fights with COVID, with injuries, with all these changes. These fighters delivered big time tonight, and nobody delivered more than the 2 fighters in the main event. What a performance by Vettori and by Hermansson.
Oh, yeah, it was back and forth battle. Hermansson was in a lot of trouble early, and he came back. Entertaining entertaining event, altogether. Yes, we did lose 3 fights today, hours before this event. But that's a testament to the testing that's being done by the fight promotion, in my opinion.
Yeah, and you can never be too safe right now with COVID, but you can also never not watch a UFC fight card. I've learned my lesson over the years, as have you. Anytime you think, oh man, the fans go, there aren't the big name people, this isn't a huge fight card, we lost all these fights, I don't know these fighters, you're still talking about the best fighters in the world. And we saw that tonight. And every time you start to think, man, this isn't a great fight card, and I see it all over social media. And like I said, I'm no longer stupid enough to do that. I used to be, and I'm still stupid, but not that stupid. But I would say literally, man, every time you start to think the fight card thinned out, it ends up being an epic fight card and some just tremendous finishes tonight. An incredible fight between Hermansson and Vettori to finish it off.
100%. And every time fights get dropped off the card, other people just step up and into the limelight. And I think we saw that tonight. Yeah, tons of great finishes. We saw some toughness of fighters, some crazy exchanges in there. And yeah, you can't judge a fight card until after it happens. The biggest stars in the sport were once unknown fighters. And so you have to watch them. And now, hopefully, some of these guys are more well known after those performances tonight.
Yeah, and it's official that Vettori got the win. Obviously, he did a lot in this fight, and we'll break it down in just a second. But he wins by unanimous decision, 49-45, 49-46, 49-46 after 5 rounds. And Hermansson, a G in this fight to stay in it. Early on, took a big 1-2 up against the cage, was knocked down. Vettori maybe did him a favor by going for a finish on the ground, grappling. But really, the biggest surprise in this fight to everyone but Vettori was that on the ground, in the grappling, and with the takedown defense, Vettori was phenomenal. And I would say the biggest thing that maybe was overlooked in this fight, Jeff Cain, was that Vettori had been training all along for Jacare. And when you're training for Jacare, you're training for grappling at the highest of levels, right? So training and paying dues, paying dividends, was Vettori, that training paying dues for him tonight. I can't talk. It's late at night. But what a fight by Marvin Vettori, the Italian Dream, looking every bit the Italian Dream tonight.
Yeah, his stock raised in my opinion tonight. His striking he was sharp with his striking, and that's an area that I thought he might actually suffer tonight with Hermansson's reach advantage and his jab ineffective. His left hand landed repeatedly, and then on the ground, like you said, he showed that he had been preparing for a very high level grappler, and he's a very high level grappler himself.
Yeah, and let's not forget, this guy was on a 3-fight win streak, and now it's 4 after beating Cesar Ferreira, who had beaten Hermansson back in the day, Andrew Sanchez and Carl Roberson. But also, when you're talking about Vettori, he trains at King's MMA in Huntington Beach, and their coaching staff trained for a camp with Kelvin Gastelum, who just fought Hermansson on Fight Island over coaching staff had training for the high leveler. It seemed like for Vettori coming in, and on top of that, when you look at Hermansson, Vettori was huge.
Yes, I couldn't make out all of that, but yeah, the training camps are interesting, and you know more about it than I do. You kind of just enlightened me on what was going on in the lead up to this fight. I didn't realize that they had all those things in common and leading up to this. Yeah, I mean, it all paid off, right? He had training partners that were familiar with the opponent, and was facing a different opponent that kind of played right into what happened tonight. The main event was great. You know, I wasn't expecting that. I really and truly wasn't expecting what just happened. I thought that there would take place a lot in the clinch. I thought Vettori would struggle a little more in getting those takedowns. All in all, that was a very entertaining main event.
Yeah, it really was. And when you look at Marvin Vettori now, it'll be interesting to see where he goes up in the rankings, because Hermansson was close to possibly working his way toward a title shot. Now Whitaker's in line, and you got the holidays coming up against Israel Adesanya. But when you look at what happened with Vettori's fight, and I was there in Phoenix in 2018 when he pushed Izzy harder and tougher than almost anybody has in his career, especially in the UFC, definitely harder than anybody has in his career. It was a split decision. He lost to Israel Adesanya, the dominant champion. You just lost Yoel Romero out of the division, but the dominating champion, Israel Adesanya, was pushed to the absolute brink. Granted, it was over 2 years ago by Vettori in Phoenix, and that was the Poirier-Gaethje card. So interesting that he's now on a 4-fight win streak, and his last loss was the split decision to the champion a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and he just took out a top 5 guy. So he's going to jump into the rankings. And that's an interesting rematch, because from his perspective, you know, he was inches away from defeating the biggest star in the division right now, the champion. And I'm sure Adesanya will say that they're both different fighters, and they are very much different fighters than they were 2 years ago. But that is motivation for Vettori, right?
Yeah, without a doubt. And he knows, and he's a huge middleweight. Again, it bears repeating. He is a big dude in there at 185. He looks so much bigger than Jack tonight, and that's a huge advantage for him. And, you know, when you look at the rankings in the division, and you mentioned Jack was at the top of the division, and here's a guy who everybody thought coming in, you know, this was not supposed to be his opponent, Vettori, right? So obviously things have jumped around, and Kevin Holland, and originally it was going to be Darren Till. So you're training. And then we talked about how it all worked out for Vettori with his coaching staff having just gotten ready for Hermansson. And, of course, with him training to face Jacare, who's a great grappler and a great veteran, those things worked out in his favor. For Hermansson, it didn't. A switch in styles, a switch in fighter, and a completely different type of opponent than who he was training to face. That did not help him tonight at all. But I give Hermansson a lot of credit after that early onslaught. His grappling didn't work the way he thought it would. His takedowns were stuffed throughout most of the fight, and he still hung in there and fought like a G until the end. But, man, he was overmatched by Vettori tonight. And Vettori was the favorite coming in. Even though Hermansson was the higher-ranked fighter, Vettori was the favorite coming in, so the odds makers knew what they were doing for sure.
Yeah, that doesn't happen very often, that the lower ranked opponent is the one that gets is the favorite heading into the fight. Yeah, Hermansson, you know, he showed his toughness. I thought that he was about to be put away in the first round, and he was taking left hands repeatedly. Took a lot of damage in that fight, but he hung in there and fired back. And you know, I think his stock it doesn't go down. It does a little bit because he took the L, but I think we saw some things out of him that maybe we didn't know about before.
Yeah, no doubt. And I mean, his last 2 losses, the TKO against Cannonier, you know, who just lost the fight to Whitaker. So clearly Hermansson's going to have some work to do to get back toward the top of the rankings and even think about a title shot. It's a very, very disappointing night for him. Huge night for Vettori. He's got a lot of people to leapfrog, though. I mean, at 13, he's got guys like Shabazian, Weidman, Uriah Hall, his teammate Kelvin Gastelum, Darren Till, who was supposed to fight tonight. Yoel Romero's gone, so he's not there anymore. But Derek Brunson. There are a lot of guys ahead of him that he could theoretically leapfrog with a performance like this tonight. Where do you think he'll end up? Just speculative.
I think he'll end up in the 6th or 7th ranked spot. I'm not sure. I'll have to really look at it, but that's just my guess right now. He's going to jump 1 spot in front of Hermansson, who's going to drop a little bit. I'll have to look at the rankings and see, you know, who lost to who and what movement is even possible. But what Vettori has going for him right now is what you brought up. He's got the story built in, right? He took the champion to a split decision. Nobody else has that story built in. And so hopefully he realizes that and puts on his marketing hat and starts exploiting that all over the place, because he has a good argument of getting back in there and drawing interest because of the history that the two have. So he very well could leapfrog a ton of people.
He could, and I have a very good argument against Israel Adesanya going up to light heavyweight to face Jan, the champion Blachowicz, or John Jones in the future, because he's got a lot of guys in his division nipping at his heels, including a very motivated and hungry and really good-looking Vettori tonight in the cage. And then, you have Costa and Cannonier. They can fight each other. Romero's gone. You have Darren Till, which would be a big fight for Vettori. So there are some possible opponents there, maybe a fight away, maybe 2 fights away from a possible title shot. But, I might keep Izzy down and literally he has to fight Whitaker and give him a rematch. But, the super fights are what everybody's looking at these days, especially against a guy like Jan, who doesn't have a lot of big name opponents right now at 205, and they're looking to make big fights. But a lot of options for sure for Dana White, Maynard, and Shelby moving forward in the middleweight and light heavyweight divisions with all these great fighters.
Oh, there's tons of great matchups in the middleweight division. And I agree. I don't think that fighters should go up or champions should go up until they've cleared out the weight class. We've seen fighters clear out their weight class, and it made sense to go up and have a super fight. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not opposed to if Jones still had the light heavyweight title of doing champion versus champion, especially considering the social media back and forth between the two and just the magnitude of that fight and what it would do in pay-per-views. But outside of that, I have no interest of having Izzy go up at this moment, but it looks like that's what's going to happen.
That's Jeff Cain. I'm Jim Grieshaber. It's MMA Weekly. We're live. Scott Peterson's at the Apex in Vegas with the UFC. Dana White coming to the podium shortly, as well as, we're sure, Marvin Vettori, and we're not sure about Jack Hermansson. But what a night, Jeff, and what a bunch of performances. And we've talked about the middleweight division now after this main event. We can get back to that. We'll hear from our winner here shortly. But a night of fights we won't soon forget. The undercard was great, but on the main card, in the co-main, Jamahal Hill was unproven. Emphasis on was unproven against top-level talent. He's now still undefeated, and he has the biggest win of his career after those combos. I mean, on the feet, sick with those combos against Ovince St. Preux. Great boxing performance tonight. OSP didn't even go for takedowns against him. We didn't see him try to take it to the ground. A huge performance by Jamahal Hill to remain undefeated and easily the biggest win of his career.
Oh, easily. It's crazy that he, made his way to the UFC through the Dana White Contender Series. And then this was his third fight in the organization, taking on OSP. And so leading up to this, I kind of question whether he would be kind of a deer in headlights. This is the biggest fight of his career. Not only did he show up, speed kills, man. Speed kills. And he was able to put OSP in bad positions and land, like you said, combination after combination until OSP was basically out on his feet, unable to respond or really protect himself. And the referee stepped in and sort of protected him. OSP had him. I thought he did a ton of damage to that lead leg, though. That fight was headed one way. And then Hill just decided that he had an opportunity to finish when he did. And boy, did he.
Yeah, and speaking of damage, man, OSP's taken a lot over the years. He's maybe at that point. He's around in weight classes. He missed weight for this fight. He's had 40 pro fights now at 25 and 15. And, at some point in your career, you start to, realize that the damage has added up. And, Ovince St. Preux, I think, is headed to that direction or in that direction. And, tonight he just didn't look super sharp. But you're right. When he switched stances and he was damaging that lead leg of Hill, it didn't look like Hill had an answer for it. But then Jamahal Hill and OSP had a tough weight cut. His coaches told him to stop trying to cut before weigh-ins yesterday, and that's a factor. But he didn't look to me like OSP tonight. He didn't look like OSP at all in there. And in these last few fights, he went up to heavyweight to fight Ben Rothwell. He's been bouncing around, and I just think he's at that point in his career where he's going to have to take a long, hard look and say, hey, what am I going to do here? What am I going to commit to? And what's going to happen for the duration moving forward?
Yes, especially since he just returned to this weight class in his last fight. And then this is the second fight after his return to the weight class, and he misses weight. And I agree, he did not look like himself tonight, but maybe that's who he is now. Maybe we're comparing him to an OSP that doesn't exist anymore, perhaps. I don't know. It didn't look like he was into it. He wouldn't. He just kind of covered up and took that damage. He didn't really even try to rotate out. Like you said, he didn't go for any takedowns, and he was getting beat to the punch in the exchanges. You think he would have tried to do that? It was a bad performance from OSP tonight, outside the leg kicks, and he was on the verge. As much as I just criticized the man, he was on the verge of 2 or 3 more leg kicks of possibly walking away with the W.
Yeah, no doubt. And they were talking about, and Dominic Cruz and Paul Felder did a phenomenal job with John Anik. I really enjoyed their commentary. And they were talking about how OSP could be close to a finish at one point, and then he ends up getting finished. Speaking of finishes, how about Gabriel Benitez? Javier Mendez says he's the hardest kicker he's ever held pads for. And keep in mind, this is Cain Velasquez, Khabib Nurmagomedov, and Daniel Cormier's coach, right? And Luke Rockhold, for that matter, speaking of kicks.
Yeah.
And Gabriel Benitez from AKA, those kicks were just huge. And then that knee, Justin James was crushed by that knee out of Extreme Couture. The kicks, the uppercuts, and then the knee for the finish. Gabriel Benitez at 155 looking like a force tonight.
Oh, he looked great. Snapped a little bit of a skid, rebounded nicely. James was really aggressive. He was taking the fight to him. He's landing early on, and then he just Benitez adjusted. And started landing kick after kick, and then that knee to the body was unreal. It just sent James, crumbling to the canvas, unable to do anything but hold his midsection, and until the referee stepped in and stopped the elbows from raining down on him. That was a performance that he had to. That was a must-win fight for him, and he came out and put in a performance like that. That's incredible. That was absolutely incredible. And now it's James that's on a 2-fight losing streak.
Yeah, and with losing 3 fights today, the upside to that for a lot of these fighters is they get a chance to shine more on the main card in a bigger position and things like that. And, Roman Dolidze tonight was absolutely fantastic against John Allen. I don't know what in the world, and they ripped him enough on the ESPN Plus telecast. But Chris Lee, man, scoring that fight for John, I don't know what the heck he was watching, man. Stevie Wonder would have seen that one better. But Roman Dolidze looked fantastic with takedowns, toughness, everything you expect out of a Georgian fighter. The second undefeated Georgian fighter to win on the card tonight. Dolidze looked fantastic.
Oh, he absolutely looked fantastic. I don't know what the judges were watching either, man. I had that 30-27. I didn't have John Allen win in a single round. And then the other
director scored at 29-28 for Dolidze. I don't know what he was watching. That's a good point, because one judge, Chris Lee, had it for Allen, but one of the other judges had it 29-28 for Dolidze. Thankfully, one of them got it right and had it 30-27. That's a great point, Jeff. 30-27 all the way, that fight.
Yeah, and former champ Dominic Cruz, he kind of called out the judges, and he wants their names put on television. He wants their faces up there, like the fighters and the referee. Well, what did you think about that?
Do you agree with him? I think Dominic Cruz is on a crusade to make officials accountable. And when they talk about how these are boxing judges and they're coming over to MMA, they don't understand grappling. That's actually a real issue, and that should not happen in the fight capital of the world. It's a completely different sport. I'm in Arizona, and I've done local and regional shows here for years where the boxing and MMA commission is one and the same. 2 completely different sports. I mean, even when you train, I was training MMA boxing yesterday with my buddy Ricardo Jimenez at Dragon Snake down here in Arizona. And the left hook that he taught me, slide over to the left, come on back, boom. That's completely different than staying in tight with boxing. Different stances, different punches, different styles, different ways of scoring, so many different things. They're completely different sports, and it's time that we recognize them as such. I love it when Dominic Cruz goes on his crusades like that, because someone has to. I mean, accountability is a big thing. And lest we forget Dana White's crusades over the years. I mean, just ask Yamasaki about that, against the officials. I mean, it's just, they need to be held accountable. Look, I mean, it's a hard job. You're in the spotlight, but if you're going to take the job, you got to understand what goes with it, man. Just like whenever I've said something stupid in my career, which has been a lot of times, I have to understand that it goes with the territory.
Yeah, I agree with what Dominic said 100%. I think that you should put their names up there, their faces up there, so we can hold them accountable. And I think we should treat referees in MMA like sort of the NFL does with their referees, and we score them, right? And once you start missing so many calls, then you're demoted and not able to do a game until you make your way back up to the big leagues again. There's too much at stake. Careers are on the line, and you aren't don't know that or not, but that particular Judge Lee does not understand the sport. It isn't boxing. Striking holds a heavy. Remember when I think it was Cecil Peoples said leg kicks don't win fights? What? So if you're not informed about the sport, you have no business being in a chair cage side judging the thing, because you can't judge it. You can only judge if you're informed, and if you're not informed, then you're not judging it. You're just throwing out an uneducated opinion.
Yeah, and after the disaster a couple of years back with Adelaide Bird, I mean, this is inexcusable for a place like Vegas. I'm 100% with you, Jeff. And, Dolidze with a clear win, and anyone who scored a round in that fight for Allen clearly doesn't know mixed martial arts. And then you look at the first fight on the main card, and I got to meet Jordan Levitt and watch him fight on the Contender Series in August up in Vegas, and Scott was there. He's undefeated now. I mean, just 8-0. And that win against Matt Wyman, who's a big-time veteran. I mean, look, he's a solid veteran, a good fighter, and that slam just picked him up. And you hear his coach say, hey, kid, bring him over here. He listens to his coach. He carries him over to his corner. Bang, just drops him right on his head. Perfect placement. The left arm drives it down. The 12th slam KO in UFC history. You and I were talking off the air a couple days ago about Rampage. That slam looked like a Rampage slam.
Oh, it looked just like Rampage against Ricardo Arona. What was that? Pride Critical Countdown 2004. I stayed up all night and watched that event, by the way, because they aired in Japan and they aired live here. We could stream them.
Pride in Japan, when they aired it live. Oh, my God.
Yeah, and that was crazy. That was a vicious. I mean, those kind of finishes right there almost excite me more than like a head kick knockout. That was because they're so rare. You don't see it. And then when we do see it, a lot of the times it's the guy doing the slamming that knocks himself out, Matt Lindland.
Yeah, and we had a really good undercard on this fight card too. I mean, Louis Smolka with a great comeback win, his 8th UFC win. 8 knockouts in his career. The TKO finish in the second round was a good win for him. You had Ilia Topuria, undefeated, the second Georgian fighter on the card that I mentioned, undefeated with the first round knockout. Huge shots, the uppercut, the hook to the body, the hook to the face, and then the right hand on the ground to Damon Jackson. And it was reminiscent. It looked just like him with Yoel Romero in the news this week. It looked just like Yoel's uppercut on Rockhold when Rockhold was starched sitting up against the cage. And that's what Topuria hit Jackson with tonight. It looked just like that shot that Romero hit Rockhold with when they fought a couple of years ago, if you remember that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do. That was just textbook for Topuria, right? I mean, it was just textbook. He chopped him down at the body, kept hitting him at the body. Then the hands come down, uppercut comes open, and he just tees off. It was beautiful. That was art. Whenever I watched that fight, that was pure art. I mean, the guy just painted the painting that he wanted to paint. It ended it. Signed his name on the bottom and cashed it in. That was beautiful.
That's unbelievable, Jeff. I love it. And to start it off, man, and I love John Vellante. I mean, who doesn't love John Vellante? This guy's been around forever. In fact, Ovince St. Prue's first fight in the UFC in 2013 was against John Vellante. And they said that on the air tonight. But Vellante, a -190 favorite coming in against Jake Collier, who did a lot of proving himself tonight. Great striking, taking big shots from Vellante, withstanding huge punishment. Vellante's got a lot of power. And obviously, Jake Collier with a big win. And it looks like, see on the screen, we're about to Austin White in just a minute to talk to the media. When that happens, we're going to shut up. Go here. Dana White, UFC on the heels of a fight, right?
What's up? Tough night. Tough night is the main event. Hermansson Vettori. Jordan Levitt, one of the slams I've seen. And with Bonita with that knee to the body. Some of you agree.
I gotta say, to point. I felt like that guy deserved $50,000 as well.
Yeah. So what I'm doing is obviously those guys win 50,000. But I'm going to take care of him, and I'm going to take care of Hill too. Those guys are going to get pretty decent checks.
Well, listen. Obviously, the makes the fight of the night. Clearly, I mean, just giving a reaction to that one. I mean, I think a lot of people weren't expect short notice and all the changes. And those guys went out there and just slugged it out. Yeah, no, I love this fight. I love this fight coming in. If you look at, obviously, Hermansson, the number 4 ranked guy in the world, tough, well-rounded, and was ready for this fight. And then Vettori has fought Israel Adesanya, probably the best out of everybody. And I expected this to be a good fight, and it lived up to exactly what I expected. As you move forward with Vettori, He was kind of low down the rankings, right? He had been for a big moment like this. I don't know how far he'll jump up, but do you now see him as a guy that's like big fight next?
I think he breaks into the top 5 with this one. Yeah, I think he breaks top 5. First Italian to ever do it. So yeah, it was an important fight in that division, and I'm excited for him. I think that kid's ready for anything.
The flip side of that, Jack Hermansson, right? I mean, this guy goes through 3 different opponents, man. And I know you like guys that'll get in there and fight. Do you? I don't want to say give a guy a pass, but when somebody takes a shot like that and makes this for you, when you're thinking of them moving, think, well, let's give them a break in what we do with them.
Well, it's a two-way street right now. This is the world we live in. You know what I mean? I was in one of the Gonzaga game. Number 1 versus number 2 got canceled today in college basketball. The big game that was supposed to happen on Thanksgiving got pushed back and ended up airing on a Tuesday at 2 o'clock at noon. The Ravens and Pittsburgh, who's undefeated. The list goes on and on. All the things that are happening right now because of the COVID. It's just, we all got a, pun intended, roll just here.
See you right now in the middleweight. I know you're just trying to get through these next 2 events, but I know that Adesanya is going to move up to 5, right? So are you starting to think, do we need to do an interim time? We need to do something to keep the moving while he's 205?
Yeah, no. He's chasing 205. He's take this fight. We'll see how that fight plays for him, and then we'll go from there.
One great moment tonight with Matt Wyman, Levitt Slam. He was up and okay, but do you have any back?
Yeah, he's okay. Yeah, they checked okay. Not only was that one of the slams I've ever seen, it was a weird sound in there tonight when he hit. It was weird. I'm glad he's okay, though. Yeah. That wasn't.
We had, not to just set you up on the judges or anything, we had kind of a weird split decision. Yeah. Everybody thought, weird. What is this? And it's the same guy, Paul Felder, winning over RDA a couple weeks back. So, guess what was your take on that? And do you ever have conversations with the commission about, like, individual games?
Yeah, I don't know how I could score that fight that way. I mean, I had a 51-year-old school teacher from Massachusetts that I grew up with, who was fighting a woman, 51-year-old woman that I went with in kindergarten, text me tonight and go, I don't know shit about these things, but judge that fight. I swear to God, that's how scary that is. And yeah, it's something she needs to stay out of, and they need out now. They're gonna face light. They really.
Great card. It was very, but of course we did have scratches. I'm curious. I mean, this is the world we're living. What's happening that testing positive on? Like, how do they're what? I'm just trying to understand what's happening.
Yeah, who knows? It's the thing is more rampant than a friend talked to who lives on an Alaska somewhere, population of 4,000 people. Over people have COVID. It's like a big deal. Now this definitely, it's we're going through. I didn't know anyone had it. One employee came in and then threw it quick, and a person, somebody that I hadn't had it. It's like, he's got it. You know what I mean?
When people test positive, I mean, do you look at, see the system is working, or do you see it as like, how is this on our fight weeks?
Yeah. How's this happening on fight? People show up, or I think what this time was somebody had contact with somebody else, and then meaning their fighter gave it to them. I don't know exactly what the deal was, but yeah, I don't know.
Fair enough. Last thing for me, surprise news yesterday with the release of Yoel Romero. Can you explain to us why Yoel is no longer with the UFC?
Well, it's not just Yoel. I mean, we're going to go through some serious cuts here at the end of the year. Probably going to have 60 cuts coming up before the first of the year. And Yoel is lost 4 of his life. He's 44 years old. Our is very inflated right now. So we're going to have some big cuts coming before the end of the year. You're going to see a lot of names going here in the next several weeks.
So with Yoel, I think people were saying, was there some weird negotiation, was there something with USADA like that?
Nothing like that. Now, just literally starting to go through the list. He's 44, 4 of his last 5, and these are the tough decisions you got to make.
What's that, Dana? I know you do fights on Fight Night and stuff, but in my interview, Vettori said he wanted to fight Paulo Costa next. I wonder what you think of that.
I love that.
Is that?
Love it. Okay. Like I said, but yeah, I love that fight.
A bit of a random question. I saw a couple of weeks you shared a clip on social media of an African training boxing. Can you foresee a future in this sport where you guys maybe set up PIs in places like that, but then give maybe scholarships to younger people to sort of eventually find talent pool?
I love all that stuff. I mean, we started to go and that whole thing fell apart. Not that it did fall apart when it did, with the guy who owned the rate, and because then COVID right after. So I want to put this thing obviously behind me. But I want to do Mexico, couple in Mexico, Puerto Rico, Africa, and all other places we're looking at right now. But yeah, I'm gonna pop these.
And you could see yourself maybe, I don't know, money or something, but giving scholarships to young kids. They can have a bit of help training and still go to school. But
I think there's a lot of different things we could do. Yeah, I love it.
Cool.
That's my.
Nice. And just an update on the UFC. You guys are you still planning to build that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's still happening. Yeah.
Cool. I don't know if you've got this far ahead in planning, but would fights be allowed to come and stay there for free and train at the PI?
Yeah, that's what it would be. It would be to our fighters then, to stay and training or fight week or whatever it might be. And I don't know how it's all going to work, but
we're just move in.
We're figuring that out.
Cool. Thanks, Dana.
Hey Dana,
hey,
how you doing, mate?
What's up, buddy? How are you?
Killer once again, man.
Thank you.
A little bit of a thought-provoking question to start with. I'm a big fan of your mindset. Now we have the ability to play with some hindsight. I am curious to know if you could get to the start of 2020 and give yourself some advice. What do you think that would be?
Well, like I said, things fell in and kind of worked for us. Some deals that we had going, like I said, the PA God that fell on that deal. I don't know. I don't know if they're that I would at the end of 2020, knowing now, we got through it. We did a good job. I mean, I would have reinforced myself. Don't be afraid to this thing and go, and do not listen to the media. Whatever you do, do not listen to the.
Awesome. There's so many amazing athletes coming out of the UFC at the moment and showing why they have to be here. I'm curious, what do you think is the most competitive deal at the moment?
The most competitive. Listen, 55 is nasty and tough. Our weight division is looking good. Bantamweight division is looking awesome. That thing revamped and you gotta love the middleweight division. I don't know if I can't answer your question which one I think is the toughest, but not too long ago, it was a few weeks ago, we were all lined up that if everything went right, like the champ was fighting the #1 contenders, and you had all these guys in the top 5 fighting each other, and for all the negative things and bad stuff that's happened this year, it's played out pretty well for us.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks.
Dana, this way. Daniel Cormier, even John Jones when he was in Albuquerque, everyone talking about these leg kicks from Gabriel Benitez. What do you think about his performance tonight? I mean, he had the knee, but his left leg was amazing. Like, he was doing so much damage.
Yeah, no, he looked incredible tonight. And the thing was too, in the decision making to get the bonus, the guy who he fought was very, very good, very real guy. And a very tough test, and he looked incredible.
His second fight in lightweight, you see him better than what he did in the featherweight.
What's that?
It's his second fight in lightweight. You see him developing better than what he did in featherweight.
Yeah, I mean, what he landed tonight, when you stop a guy with a body, what he did.
Now that we know the suspension for Jair, he's available to fight in March. Submit for him. There's a chance that the runner fight.
I don't know about that. Yeah. Thank you. Have a good night. Thanks.
There we go. We're back, Jeff Cain. Well, not a a super long media session tonight for the boss Dana White. I mean, when I'm there, it's at least a few questions longer. I figure like John Morgan takes his 80%, and then everybody else kind of gets the crumbs. But when you look at what happens there with Dana White, the thing that stood out the most to me, Jeff, that he said was that 60 cuts before Christmas with a lot of big names getting bounced out of the UFC, and he just called it a part of doing business. You know, Yoel's lost 4 out of his last 5. He's 44 years old. I actually get that one, but Dana opening the door and letting everybody know tonight, you're going to see some big name fighters get cut by the UFC before the end of the year. And they've been adding a lot of fighters through the Contender series. They've been doing things like that. With COVID, they've lost a lot of money with the live gates. It's got to be a big factor in that with, as he said, 60 big name fighters going to be showing the door before the end of the year.
That's a lot of fighters. That is a lot of fighters. And this is on the heels of, them parting ways with Anderson Silva, the former middleweight champion as well, older as well, and has lost several fights. Yeah. But those are viable names. Those are household names. And the UFC's cutting them. I don't know what that says for the middle of the road, the journeyman fighters that are still on the roster. I don't know who's safe. That's the biggest question that comes into my mind is what big name fighters will be cut, and then what fighters are safe, because that's 60 people off the roster is a considerable amount of fighters. I wonder if Bellator is licking their chops right now.
Yeah, Bellator, some of the other promotions too, like the PFL. But I definitely think that it's something that you have to consider in this day and age with what's going on with COVID. But again, Yoel, 44, Anderson Silva, and Dana even said after his last fight against Uriah Hall, like, man, anyone who lets him fight is irresponsible. And I'm paraphrasing, but not by much. And there comes a point in time for everyone. Sports are very cruel and unforgiving all the time. Sports are very the life, the shelf life, the career of an athlete never usually ends well. I mean, how many legends have we seen in how many sports? We have to make the list go on and on of guys who the game just moves on, and Father Time, as Charles Barkley says, is undefeated. So you come to that point in every career as an athlete where you don't perform like you used to. The other players keep getting better and better, and in this case, fighters. And in a sport like fighting, like mixed martial arts, you're putting yourself at risk when you get in there at a certain point in time. And we talked about it with OSP, not necessarily maybe putting himself at risk, but at a crossroads maybe in his career where you might not always make the best choices for yourself. And in the case of Anderson Silva, the UFC made it for him. In the case of Yoel Romero, what does he make? $500,000 a fight, guaranteed. That's a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
For a guy who's lost 4 out of 5, who's 44 years old and doesn't draw, ants to a picnic.
Well, I think that's ultimately the bottom line on these decisions, right? It's the people that aren't worth that the promotion doesn't feel is worth the contract. The bottom line on the contract. And so, Yoel Romero and Anderson, for that matter, were both highly paid fighters. And the limelight on their career, they're in the twilight of their career. And if and that might be putting it nicely, and so I understand those cuts, but I am intrigued on who else is going to be cut and how big of names are they going to be. I mean, Yoel Romero was a top 5 ranked fighter. He fought for the title in his last fight. I know, yes, he's lost 3 fights in a row. He's 4 of his last 5, but he fought for the title in his last fight. So he was good enough to fight for the world championship 1 fight ago, except now he's not good enough to stay on the roster. And so the message is kind of weird. It has to come down to money, right? It has to.
But was he good enough, Jeff? Was he good enough, or were they just doing Izzy a solid when Izzy wanted to fight him? Was he really? Should he really have been the challenger that night? No,
he should not have been. But still, for the fight promotion to give him that, they're validating that. That we criticize it because we're not the ones, that put it together and everything, but they promoted it like it should have happened. I can say that. I don't think he should have been in there, but I understand why the fight happened. And I understand why he's cut, but I'm just saying that I'm interested in who else they're going to cut, because we know that somebody that just fought for a title just got cut. And so,
no doubt. And he did, in fairness, drill Izzy with a big shot in that fight early. And, a lot of people thought he won that fight. A lot of people thought he won the second Whitaker fight and that he should have been a champion in the UFC, a silver medalist, a great career. By no means in any way do I mean to denigrate him. He's been an incredible athlete and a warrior in the UFC, and I've really enjoyed watching him compete, but it is a cruel sport. There's a lot of money involved, and I think if I'm anybody in the UFC right now who's making a bunch of money and isn't bringing in money on the bottom line, remember, it's a whole different model because the ESPN money comes in regardless as long as they're putting on the shows that the contract dictates and adhering to that. And then you're not drawing big pay-per-view numbers, no matter how big of a fan base you have. I'd be a little nervous. I'd be a little nervous if I were some of these fighters that have those inflated paychecks.
I would be real nervous. I mean, I would be real nervous, especially a lot of these former champions that aren't getting back to title fights, that really and truly that the path back to the top doesn't exist anymore, but they still have some sort of value. Now we've got to put their pay-per-view, worth on whether or not they're going to stay in the UFC. There's a ton of fighters that come to mind, and with big names, household names. I mean, I don't know. You always keep the guy on the rise, right? Especially kind of organization because they're at a cheaper rate. But it's going to be really interesting on who's not safe. I think with that number, 60 fighters, I think there's going to be several that people are going to be really shocked about.
Or does he? I mean, I don't think you kill the flyweight division now with Figueiredo, and you got Figueiredo Moreno coming back on 21 days next week for the pay-per-view. But, if you kill that whole division, they did release Jussier Formiga last month, and, you might just tell those guys that they have to bounce up to 35, and you've already got Figueiredo saying, hey, I'm the best pound-for-pound fighter in the UFC. 35 is already loaded anyway, even if Henry Cejudo doesn't come back. Well, that division's loaded at one, and Dillashaw is coming back here soon again. So maybe you bump the top contenders at 25 up to 35 because it's such a thin division. Maybe that happens. And, obviously you've had some things happen this year, but when Dana talked about the best divisions, and I missed one of them with a little blurb we had there, but he talked about 155, 185, 135, maybe the top divisions in the UFC right now. I found that to be interesting. What were your thoughts on his answer to that question?
Yeah, I mean, traditionally, we've always thought of 155 as one of the most competitive divisions for years. And the lighter weights, I think, are always more competitive because the smaller people, to be professional athletes in other sports, the window is not as big. And so we get overall, in my opinion, better athletes at 155, 145, 35 and below. Because, if you're 265 pounds and can move like a lineman, then you're a lineman, right, in the NFL. You know what I mean? I don't think you're necessarily coming into
Great
the
point.
fight game. But as a smaller, in the smaller weight classes, that I think that they represent the best athletes in the world. So I think 155 is still competitive, particularly because we don't necessarily know the fate of Khabib's career. Is he going to come back? Is he not? He says he's not, but that's Dana keeps alluding to leaving that possibility there. And then Conor returning. I mean, there's that division's definitely interesting. Like you brought up with Cejudo, that whole division's completely Cejudo gone. That whole division's completely wide open. And the 145 division is probably one of my favorite divisions in the UFC because it still has those older fighters, right? It's still kind of got that nostalgia. They're still at the top of the division, and you have this younger crowd coming in and taking over. And so we're at this unique moment right there where we're seeing this turnover in that division that we're not necessarily seeing in the other ones. But I agree with him on the lighter weight classes. I don't know. 185 is interesting, but that's only if Izzy stays there, right?
Yeah, and Paulo Costa against Vettori is who Vettori called out. So that's one that a lot of people would like to see. Paulo Costa coming off a tough loss to Israel Adesanya, who made him look bad in there. And Izzy's done that to a lot of people, not to Vettori, though. So that Costa Vettori fight has a lot of sizzle to it. You have a hungry Kelvin Gastelum in there. You have Darren Till in there. You have Whitaker looking to get his belt back. 55, even without Khabib. And you got to think that would be either GSP or Conor. But you got Conor, you got Poirier, you got Gaethje, you got Michael Chandler in here now. Who knows what's going to happen with Tony Ferguson against Oliveira, who's won 7 in a row. They fight next week. That's a great division. 135 with Jan. He hasn't really beaten anybody per se. He beat Aldo, who lost 2 fights in a row. Sterling's getting that next title shot. Dillashaw wants the winner. Sanhagen rebounded with the win. That's a pretty good division, but it gets a lot better if Henry Cejudo comes back to try to reclaim that belt. Or does he – and look, at 45, man, you made a great point with Volko and Ortega, who made a big statement in his last fight. T-City coming back after that loss to Max, and you still have Max looking to get his belt back. A lot of people thought he won that last fight against Volko. 45's loaded.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of these weight classes are loaded. I mean, the UFC can stand to cut fighters, right? For sure. I agree with Dana that the roster's probably bloated a little bit, particularly in these times, right? Where selling becomes harder and harder, and advertising dollars become harder and harder, and then people buying pay-per-views becomes harder and harder. And so the UFC is definitely going to have to, trim the lower hanging fruit. But these divisions are still stacked. I mean, they can make 60 cuts, and we still have all these awesome fights to put together. So 60 sounds like a crazy number, but depending on who it is, I don't think it does much to the landscape of these divisions.
No, maybe not. And you hate to speculate with men's and women's careers on the line and think of who might get cut. But we talked about big money fighters, but you still have to keep your TV partners happy. You have to have some names to get those ratings and subscriptions for ESPN. So that's something that you really need to look at as well. And, Jeff, it's crazy. Dana White with a brief media session tonight, not the biggest fight card, down to 8 fights before we started, but some great performances tonight. The one thing that really stood out to me, as much as the 60 cuts with Dana, was when he said, for all the things that have happened this year, it's played out pretty well for us, being the UFC. And that was what he said, and what he meant by that, and he clarified it a little bit in case you guys weren't here for that or whatever. He said that they've had a lot of top contenders against champions, a lot of guys in the top 5 fighting each other, a lot of big time matchups. And it's really played out well from a matchup standpoint and from a big fight standpoint for the UFC, albeit without fans, albeit they didn't want to bring Conor back without the fans, and he's coming back without them. I mean, you just keep pushing forward. And Dana made the point too. Look, the Ravens Steelers was moved. He said Tuesday was moved to a Wednesday in the afternoon on kickoff because of COVID. And you lost 1 versus 2 in college basketball today. The UFC with only 8 fights. I mean, I don't know. You've been doing this a lot longer than I have, man. Have you ever seen a UFC fight card with 8 fights or fewer before? I mean, that's a low number. I've seen it a lot on the local and regional level. I've seen it fall apart on the day of weigh-ins and the day of fights for sure. But for the UFC, that's an extremely low number.
Yeah, you would probably have to go back to before the Zuffa days, right? I don't remember that happening. I mean, it might have happened in the early UFCs, maybe even up to the UFC 20s, but that hasn't happened since the UFC, since I've covered the sport. They've all been 10, 12 or more fights on the fight card. We're just living in a different time. COVID's ravaged tons of sports, right? But the UFC still keeps moving forward. All these sports keep moving forward. You just have to deal with the setbacks. You don't know who has it, and so we keep testing, and then when positive tests come, we move to do what's appropriate in those situations. All these sports are trying to do this, but there's inherent risk involved, and we see this almost on every fight card, right? We're losing a fight because of COVID, and while that probably is not the best headlines for the sport, the other side of that is it is a positive note for the testing. The testing is working, right? The testing is working, and so that's the biggest thing that I take away from it. The testing is working. The UFC's protocols are working, and they're not risking people. As soon as someone tests positive, that is done. That fight's off. It doesn't matter if it's the main event. Doesn't matter if it's a title fight. Just they move to a total different direction. And so props to them on that. But yeah, COVID's going to be the story for the next several months when it comes to, not only sports, but everything, right?
Yeah, no doubt. And it definitely, the UFC, Dana did an interview with me in August, and you can check it out, search it up on MMA Weekly. And he talked about being 5 years ahead. When they're in the offices every day, they're planning 5 years ahead. And he talked tonight in the press conference about, and obviously COVID put a big wrinkle in that. And now they're talking about building a fighter hotel where they can have their own bubble, where they're completely almost like a Fight Island setup, where they're completely self-sufficient. Everything's done on site. The fighters can stay there. They can train at the PI. That's a big thing. And obviously things like moving around the globe, continuing to places like Africa, he mentioned a couple of times tonight, and even doing maybe a couple of fights in Puerto Rico. The goal from day one has been global with Dana White and the UFC, and you've seen that. in every interview he's done and everything he's talked about has been, hey, you go to any corner of the world, everyone wants to watch a fight. And we're in high school, there's a fight in the cafeteria, the whole school stops and everybody watches the fight. That's the way it goes. But the Fighter Hotel and the whole entire self-contained bubble is the biggest thing when I think of this, because the other sports don't have that advantage. Even when the NBA comes back, they're not going to have the bubble again. You can't do a bubble in football or basketball. Baseball did their own versions of bubbles in the postseason, but fighting is unique. I mean, Top Rank Boxing's got it at MGM. Bellator's got it at the Mohegan Sun in Connecticut. The UFC can do it on their own property with their own facility. And hey, why not build a hotel, man? Why not make it all self-contained? There's way too much to lose to not spend that money, because COVID could be the very beginning. We don't know. I mean, I'm 48. I've never seen this. This might be our norm. We might get 10 more COVIDs for all we know.
No, I mean, we don't know, you know, and we don't know the long-term effects of this COVID, you know, really. And so, yeah, the new reality is that the promotions and sports leagues are going to have to adjust the way they do business. And we've seen that, you know, with Fight Island, the UFC coming back for the first time of all the sports in Jacksonville. I felt like they were the litmus test for all professional sports. And then we started seeing other sports coming back. I felt that the NFL or the NBA particularly did an excellent job with the bubble down there, sort of exactly the same idea as Fight Island, but they proved it could work. And so it just makes sense for the UFC to do this, especially if they have the property and revenue.
Yeah, and I'm not laughing at that. I'm laughing at a text I just got from Ken Pishna, our editor for the duration of MMA Weekly. I mean, just like you, Jeff, he said 10 more COVIDs, I'll kick your ass, Jim. That's what he said. So I had to give Ken a little shout out. And Ken works like a dog every day at MMA Weekly, does a great job. So, yeah, I mean, look, we don't know. We don't know in this world, you know, and that's one thing we know for sure with 2020. We can never take anything for granted. Dana was asked what he would do differently in 2020. Of course, he had to say, do not listen to the media. He's always taking shots. In fact, I lift and box every day, so he can't call me a wimp like he calls all the media wimps. And I'm getting big just so I can interview him, and he can't call me a wimp because, you know, he struck a chord there. But all kidding aside, man, it's I think, you know, Sports Illustrated always did their sport. It's different digital age now. It doesn't hold the same. And if you were the Sports Illustrated Sportsman of the Year for a long time, it was the highest honor in sports. I can't think of anybody in the sports world. And I know all the people who are on my case about this, they're going to say I'm on my knees for Dana again, but you cannot deny what this man has done this year with the UFC and to lead the way for the entire sports world. You mentioned it. There is no denying the fact that Dana White has led the charge and gone right through COVID and shown all the other sports leagues and everyone else how to do it. You cannot take that away from him. This has been his year. It's been the toughest year of his life, but he has absolutely shined and marched right through this. You can't take that away from him.
No, and he took the risk, right? I mean, and he not only showed them how to do it, he showed them that it could be done, because that was the biggest question. When Dana talks about the media, we didn't shut states down. We're not the one that put in the regulations and everything. I think when he talks about that, he's talking about the concern from some people in the media that maybe this was a bad idea. And the risk Dana White took by coming back in Jacksonville could have been all COVID positive tests. And what kind of a nightmare would that be? And so people were just entertaining the worst case scenario. It did not turn out that way. It was a huge success. And that comes because Dana's used to taking big risks, but they're calculated risks. You know, and I think that's the biggest thing with COVID. Anything that we do now in a group of people is a risk, but it's the world's just about probabilities. We can put things in place, protocol in place to reduce the probability. Dana White's shown that can be done. Your sports league can move forward. Fans can get the sports that they love, and we can, you know, you just adapt. And the UFC was on the forefront of being the first ones to adapt. And I think the rest of the sports world was kind of just sit back and kind of waited to see what was going to happen with the UFC.
Yeah, and let's not forget March 14th in Brazil with no fans. Let's not forget the risk he took there with the Kevin Lee, Charles Oliveira fight card with Gilbert Burns and Damian Maia on there. And I mean, that one with no fans, right as everything was shutting down. Vegas was already shut down when that happened, and that event carried on. And, you know, yeah, I mean, you got to have balls of steel to be in a leadership position. I like leaders who lead from the front, always have. I don't like reactive leaders, Roger Goodell. I like leaders who lead from the front, like Dana White has done this year, like Adam Silver, for example, in the NBA, but you lead from the front, not from behind. You lead reactively or proactively, rather, not reactively. And what Dana White and the UFC have done this year has been nothing short of remarkable to keep these events going, and the positive tests have come. Fighters are coming back in. Look, Holland's going to fight supposedly against Jacare next week. So coming off COVID tests, they're fighting a couple weeks later. You get it. You come back, you fight. I like the mentality, and look, there's entirely too much going on in this world, in my opinion, right now, where participation trophies and we're afraid of everything and we don't want to leave our house and all that. I believe sometimes you just bite down on the mouthpiece, fighting term, and you march forward. And that's what Dana White and the UFC have done. And you've mentioned it several times here tonight. The testing is working, and it's working great.
Yeah. Well, I think part of moving forward was it's calculated. They had a plan. They had a plan in place. And, Dana, he did bite down on the mouthpiece and move forward, but he also used a lot of head movement and dodged a lot of bullets. And so I do give that to him. Dana did he's remarkable what's happened this year with the UFC, led by Dana White. And he has led by example. And but he's done so. It wasn't reckless. Whenever we say you took a risk, that doesn't imply that the risk was reckless, right? I mean, riding a motorcycle is a risk, but you can wear a helmet to minimize the risk. And so that's sort of the way I look at it, is that the UFC took these big risks, but they also prepared for it. Worst case scenario, we just cancel the fights, right?
Every single thing about this sport is a risk. Life is a risk,
yes.
But I agree with you, Jeff. It's fantastic to be. And look, what would we have been covering on MMA Weekly over the summer? There was a point in time when the UFC was the only thing going on. Let's not forget that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everybody followed suit, and the NBA did a fantastic job. I'll put them right up there with the UFC. They did a fantastic job in their bubble in Florida, and the Lakers ended up winning the title with LeBron and AD. But and baseball did the best they could. The NFL somehow has managed, and how college football's done it, I have no idea, with, some like the Pac-12 and the other conferences just getting started now after some schools and some conferences have been going all year, reshuffling teams, reshuffling conferences. It's been a very tough year for everyone, but no one has outshined Dana White in the UFC. And another fantastic fight card tonight, Jeff, to bring it back full circle. Our winner of our main event, Marvin Vettori, number 13 at 185, stepping in last minute to fight Jack Hermansson at number 4, who Dana said will not slip a lot. You got to kind of give him somewhat of a pass. He took this fight, didn't have to. Well, maybe he had to do it, but he didn't have to, necessarily win this fight to avoid slipping too far down. So I like that Hermansson won't be punished too much for losing this fight, won't lose too much. But the big gain for Vettori, who Dana said will now be, for sure, he thinks, in the top 5.
Yeah, I said that I thought he would be around 6 or 7, without looking at the rankings, and I'll get into that tomorrow, take a deep dive into that. But
MMAWeekly.com.
Yeah, I don't think Hermansson lost much either. I said that earlier. I feel like that he showed how tough he was. He took that fight on short notice. He really didn't have much to gain, and he put on a good performance. And I think that what happened tonight was more of Vettori than a detriment to Hermansson. I think that Vettori's going to jump in the rankings high, and Hermansson's going to drop a little bit. I think what we discovered tonight is that Vettori is legit. He's a for real contender in this division. I don't think that we learned that Hermansson's not. We just learned that he isn't going to beat Vettori tonight, and so I think that Hermansson's going to drop to about the same spot, 7 or 8, and then you're going to see Vettori jump up in the top. Dana says top 5, and he might be right.
Yeah, think about how elite you have to be a UFC champion. And that for Hermansson, the thing that doesn't bode well is the loss to Vettori, also the TKO to Cannonier. And those are 2 of the top fighters in the division. But you got to beat those guys, obviously, if you want to be the champion. And he's going to have a shot to get a couple of wins and get right back in the title picture. That can happen at any time. Vettori called out Paulo Costa. Dana said he loves that fight. 2 huge 85ers. I mean, that's the first thing that stands out to me. Costa coming off his first loss. Vettori pushed Israel Adesanya to the brink a couple of years ago, and Phoenix fought him better than anyone ever has. But 2 huge middleweights who cut a lot of weight and literally ballooned back up on fight night. So you'll see 2 of the bigger guys in the division if that fight gets made and comes to fruition with Costa and Vettori. And maybe the winner gets a title shot after Whitaker gets Izzy. And we heard Dana say there wouldn't be an interim champ if Izzy goes up to 205.
That's good. That means Izzy's going to defend his belt. It's going to be a one-off moving up. And I'm fine with that. Kind of like Anderson Silva against Forrest Griffin. You know, that fight wasn't for anything. He kind of went up and fought and then moved right back down. I'm not opposed to that at all. But yeah, I like the Costa Vettori matchup 100%. You know, Costa's looking to rebound and maintain that top breaking in that top tier of the division, and Vettori is moving right into that. And so you kind of want to kill his momentum while maintaining your place. And that's an excellent fight. The fight makes perfect sense. They should just sign the papers tonight.
Yep, and Vettori win streak and his grappling was outstanding tonight. I think Hermansson, most people thought, had a big advantage there after what he did against Kelvin Gastelum. His vicious ground and pound, his takedowns were virtually, for the most part, stuffed tonight by Vettori, and that was fantastic to see him with that takedown defense. And again, he was training for Jacare. He was training for a world-class grappler. His coaching staff had just prepared Kelvin Gastelum to face Hermansson over the summer, and that was a quick early stoppage. You don't want to call it a fluke, an early submission. Definitely not a fluke, but what I mean is anyone can get caught any time by either a knockout TKO or submission, and you know that heel hook that he got Gastelum with was phenomenal. So people coming in thinking that Hermansson had a huge edge on the ground, especially Hermansson, and it didn't work out in his favor. But at the top of the 85 division, there's a newcomer knocking on the door ready to come in the house, and it's Marvin Vettori, and I like him. You know, Dana loves the story. He's the first Italian fighter to be in that position.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a great story and a great, you know, scenario for the UFC all the way around. And Jeff, I also want to say, when we talk about how great the UFC's been and how great Dana's been this year, we have to give a lot of credit to the fighters. We have two fighters in a championship fight next week who are fighting each other 21 days after they last fought, which is less than half the time of the UFC record turnaround in between fights. You've had fighters fighting 4 or 5 times this year, fighters staying in Vegas, Contender Series winners saying, hey, put me on in 2 weeks. The fighters have really stepped up big time this year too.
A lot of fighters see opportunity, you know, and they've gotten it. You know, we've seen a lot of people emerge from sort of out of nowhere this year because they were willing to take the fights and they were willing to step up on short notice. I think that, yeah, I agree. You gotta give it to the fighters because ultimately they're the sport, right? They're the product that we're selling. They're the product that we're covering. They're the product the UFC's selling. But yeah, they have stepped up big time, particularly like you brought up the main event fighters in the next event. We're down to 2 events left this year. It's crazy. This year's kind of flown by in a way, but it hasn't. It feels like it's been a decade, but at the same time, I don't really remember a lot of it. It's weird. It's like it's flown by, but at the same time, been a slow pace.
It's been a great year for all of us at MMA Weekly, and we're launching all kinds of new programming. And man, Jeff, this is fun. I can't think of a better way to spend a Saturday night watching fights and breaking it down with you after. We're waiting for Marvin Vettori to come to the podium. I think he went back to Italy after that win to change. And then it always seems it's like you think about everything they have to do post-fight, all the pictures they have to take, all the, you know, the cool down period and showering up and all. It takes a while for these fighters, and that's why I didn't understand why they bring the co-main winner out during the main event. Why not just wait and have him out now when we're sitting here with all this dead time doing nothing? But that's, you know, not for me to decide. I can solve everyone's problems but my own, it seems like. But a great fight card. Only 8 fights tonight. The UFC was getting hammered on Twitter earlier tonight because it was supposed to start at 7 o'clock West Coast time and 10 o'clock, or rather 7 o'clock. What was it? I can't remember. I'm in Phoenix and we don't change our clocks in Arizona, which is ridiculous. But anyway, the fight started an hour later than they were supposed to start. The UFC was getting ripped. Nothing they could do about the COVID. There was also an injury, you know, scratch on this fight card. And even some of the fighters were commenting. But the 8 fights, the 16 fighters who stepped into the octagon tonight put on a performance for the ages. This was a very, very good UFC fight card with some outstanding performances and fighters stepping up. And you have to think that these fighters who are stepping up, not only fighting a lot, but performing when they're asked to, I wonder if some of those 60 cuts Dana was talking about will be fighters who weren't so eager to step up and fight through this. I wonder if he'll send any messages there. He's been known to do that in the past.
Well, it would not surprise me. I mean, you turn down fights that are offered to you in the UFC. That's usually not an action that promotes career longevity. You know, you got to take the fights offered to you, unless you're the champion, and then you still have to take the fights, but you might have a little bit of a leeway on determining who the opponent's going to be, maybe, but probably not really. I mean, if the UFC wants to play hardball, you're fighting who they put up in front of you, or you're not going to fight. And so, yeah, I think that a lot of these fighters that we've seen step up, a lot of these fighters that you brought up from the Dana White Contender Series, the last event featured a lot of them. And this event featured a lot of them. We're seeing these guys coming to the UFC hungry and willing to step up. And I think that's going to go a long way on whether or not they are kept on the roster. In fact, I think that you keep them around more than you do the difficult ones. You know, there's always people that are difficult to deal with, and now's not exactly the time to be difficult.
No, and some fighters come to mind, and I don't want to take any shots at anyone because, you know, whatever, but I'm just talking and thinking about guys who maybe might not be on the nice list with Dana White. And the first guy that pops into my mind is a guy who I like very much. I actually really like him a lot, in Tyron Woodley. Coming off those losses, albeit to the 3 best in the world in his division besides him, and is not a Dana White favorite. And, you know, a guy like Leon Edwards, who's had some issues. I mean, I'm not saying these guys are going to get cut, but you know, we're living in a different world. These are different times. And, you know, Dana's not going to just let a guy like that, you know, go over to Bellator. So I don't know. I mean, would you see a guy, and I hate to just single him out because, again, I love him. He's been great to me. But a guy like Woodley, would you be a little bit nervous if you were T Wood right now?
Be extremely nervous. Would be extremely nervous if I were T Wood. You know, whenever we were talking about it earlier, he came to mind, but we didn't want to say because it is their careers, and we don't know.
I hate it.
But I agree. I think that he is definitely one of those ones that I'm concerned about. You know, and I said that the former champions, that their path to a title just doesn't seem like it's there anymore. Then you kind of replace them for people who are headed in that direction, right? I mean, that's kind of the way all sports work. But yeah, T Wood's definitely, I'd be very nervous if I were him right now. I'd probably be on the call. I'd probably be texting Dana White right now, right? I'd be texting to the matchmakers right now going, am I okay?
I bet you there's a lot of managers sending out those texts right now. I mean, literally, you're going to see this happening. And look, if a lot of fighters are going to do better because of this. If you get cut by the UFC, you might make more money. If you go to Bellator, you might have a better opportunity in that. And Coker's going to be licking his chops. But at the same time, the UFC is developing new talent all the time, and you have elite fighters coming through and getting better and better. So we'll see. But at the same time, man, I hated to do that with T Wood. I'm sorry, T Wood, if you're watching, man, but you know, just thinking about it, doing our jobs here, it's literally, you know, that's Dana White's been known to send messages like that. But if you're making a lot of money and you're someone who's a former champ whose path is not clear to a title again, if you're someone who's on a losing streak or a skid that makes a lot of money, you don't sell a lot of pay-per-views, I'd be shaking in my shoes a little bit. And again, look, our job security is not always there in the media either. It's a very tough business. It just goes with the territory. And we're certainly not here to rain on anyone's parade or to say that we think someone should get cut. But, you know, we're just thinking what the fans are thinking. And I think some of the first names that the fans might be thinking about are some of the ones that we might mention. But, you know, there are guys like Dominic Cruz. Where does Dominic Cruz go from here? He's great on commentary. Where does he go as a fighter from here after that last loss to Cejudo? Where does Jose Aldo go from here? Silva's gone. Yoel Romero's gone. Changing of the guard. There are a lot of other fighters who come to mind. You know, there are some female fighters who come to mind. A lot of veteran female fighters whose path to a title is non-existent at this point. And, there are a lot of names and fighters popping into my head right now, too many to name, but with 60 cuts, Jeff, that's a lot of fighters, man. And he said by the end of the year, we'll know soon enough.
Just an update on Marvin Vettori. He's getting stitches right now. So they said hopefully 5 more minutes.
Okay.
Thank you, Scott. Scott's at the apex of MMA, the UFC headquarters in Vegas. Scott Peterson. By the way, Scott has the ultimate quarantine beard. I know, Jeff, you got the beard game going strong, but Scott's quarantine look, I mean, he looks like he's been in a cave for 100 years.
Yeah, he's scary looking. Scott, I think I saw him on a woman.
Come in front of the camera real quick, Scott, so they can see this thing. Come on. We want to see the quarantine beard, Scott.
It has a life of its own. It's like an alien entity.
It is, man. It's and I don't know if you're going to be able to hop in front of the camera there and show the audience this beard, but we got to see it during the connection check. We
amazing.
can't call it a sound check.
I'll pass.
No, we're not.
I just have the peach fuzz going here compared to you guys. Jeff, you got a pretty good one too. I just got like the little I'm the high school kid around here with this beard.
See, Jeff has
this
a
is lazy.
save breakfast. I get to save breakfast and lunch, and eat
There
throughout
you-
the whole
yeah.
day.
You never know when
Yes.
you're going to need those MREs when you're on these long UFC. Did you eat the Canes yet, Scott?
Oh yeah, they brought Cane's chicken. It was great.
Did you eat it already? Yeah.
Oh,
I
yeah,
love it.
it's
I
all
love those
gone.
late night pizzas and Cane's chicken that they bring in for the media. But no, the UFC does a good job taking care of us too. But man, what a great night of fights, Jeff. We're waiting for Vettori to come in. We just talked about him and what he did for himself tonight. Jordan Levitt, how excited are you about him, his future? He got the chance to be bumped up to the first fight on the main card tonight, and he wins by a slam KO, only the 12th in UFC history at 22 seconds of round number 1.
It was impressive. It was devastating. It was vicious. One of the most vicious slams. You heard Dana say that it had a different sound. I was worried because it took him so long to get up. And like you pointed out when you were breaking it down earlier, he elevated him. Matt kept his guard closed, and he slammed him to the canvas at forearm to the side of his neck, pushing all the weight down and impacted his head and rendered him unconscious immediately. That it was vicious. I was impressed with it though, right? I mean, that's a way to keep your winning streak alive. That's a way to impress the bosses, and that's a way to keep your job. We were just talking about the 60 fighters going to be cut. I actually think, getting back to that, some of the women can feel safer because their divisions aren't as deep. The UFC can't thin out certain divisions much more than they already are. But I would be worried about, because Yoel Romero he was ranked in the top 5. He just fought for a title fight. And so when we bring up T Woods of the world, those are the guys that I'm kind of looking at because they're in that same position, right? They've been to the top. They haven't got back to the top, but they're still getting paid like they're at the top. And there's other fighters that are former champions that I'm not going to mention because I don't know. Some of them might even have fights coming up that they're fighting for their jobs, literally. But we saw fighters tonight like that who were on 2-fight losing streaks, and this had to be it. Benitez for one person. Look at the performance he put in. He was on a 2-fight losing streak. He didn't feel comfortable if he didn't win tonight. And now James, his opponent, is on a 2-fight losing streak. He's not feeling comfortable. I would say that there's some anxiety in the roster right now with Dana making that statement publicly, right? And like you brought up, I would say managers are calling, texting anyone in the UFC that they can contact right now to figure out whether or not their fighter's safe. We do have the holidays coming up. This is a terrible time, but it's just 2020, right? It's what everybody's having to deal with. You've seen layoffs and cutbacks in some of the biggest companies in the world, and I think that you're just see that's just part of it. And not to mention, I think their roster was a little elevated or bloated to begin with.
So many this year, and part of that too is they'll fight right away. They're coming in and they'll just keep fighting, and they're right there and they're hungry. And look at a guy like Levitt. He hasn't made money in his career, and he's going to get a bonus tonight, which is life changing for him. And it's just you never want to say like and if I'm looking at some others like a Diego Sanchez or a Carlos Condit or people like that who have been around a long time and made a lot of money and done a lot of big things in the sport. And I'm not certainly suggesting that they should be, but these, again, are names of fighters that we might be a little concerned about. And nobody ever wants to see our favorite fighters go. Nobody ever. I want to see Carlos Condit fight forever. But it so happens in this sport that there comes a time for every fighter. And, you wonder if Tony Ferguson's hitting that time. Some of his fights lately, he hasn't looked the same. You look at a guy like Anthony Pettis, a former champ, but he stays busy. He fights all the time. Is a Cowboy Cerrone safe? I mean, I'm just throwing names out there, but you just don't know.
No,
and these are fighters who Bellator would pay a lot of money to right away, and a lot of other fighters might not be so lucky.
Yeah. Well, I think Romero is what makes me nervous for a lot of these, the Chris Weidmans of the world. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. He's coming off a win, which, against Akhmedov, which was a good one for Chris. But yeah, I mean, you're right. That's a tough one. There's another guy you want to see fight forever. How do you not love Chris Weidman?
Exactly. And so, but I feel like with the names that they're getting rid of and Dana saying they're going to be big names, I think that we're going to be looking at the Carlos Condits, and I mean, maybe even Nate Diaz, right? I mean, outside of a Conor, the trilogy with Conor, what's left? Well, is he going to get to a title fight in any division? No. And so I don't, I'd be worried. I think that there's some big names that are going to be cut. Honestly, maybe being a new person to the roster might be in your favor right now.
Yeah, no doubt. And I find myself doing what I hate doing, just like mentally scanning through all the divisions right now, trying to think of more names. And I mean, is Yair Rodriguez safe after the suspension? I mean, who knows? You don't know. I mean, there could be anybody out there who pissed Dana White off behind the scenes that we don't know about, or has been difficult to deal with on any level, or doesn't, someone they want to send a message to, or send a message to other fighters through. You just don't know. But I know that, you're sweating right now if you're some of these guys, and you always want to take care of your money. You always want to take care of your future as much as you can, especially in a sport like this, man, because it is brutal. There is no doubt. I mean, when you tell Anderson Silva you're not fighting here anymore after everything he's done, all the money he's made for that company, and all the fans he's got all over the world, I mean, look, it's a brutal sport, and sometimes these things have to happen. And Yoel Romero in that boat, I mean, did you think it would happen? No. But did it come out of nowhere and surprise a lot of people? Hell yeah. But when Dana White says he's lost 4 out of 5, he's 44 years old. I mean, look, he's had his title shots. He's not going to win the belt in that division. Probably not going to get another title shot. At that point in time, you look and you're in the room and you're making those choices. You're looking around and you're going, do we keep him? Do we cut him? Do we keep him? Do we cut him? You can make a compelling argument either way. But at the same time, if you're trimming the fat and you're keeping a lot of fighters who don't make a lot of money so that you can fill fights, and the cards are top heavy, and we've talked about it with Conor, Jeff, when you have a Conor McGregor fight card, you don't need a lot of big names on the card. You don't need a lot of fan favorites on the card because you have Conor McGregor who's going to sell all the pay-per-views himself. So you don't need the big name fighters on all the cards anymore, as it's more and more top heavy, like a boxing card, for example.
Yeah, I mean, the dynamic is definitely changing on the way these fight cards, or the way they're putting together fight cards. I don't know who all is going to be cut. I was just thinking brainstorm. I'm like you, man. I was running through all the divisions in my head, and Joanna jumped out to me. I mean, she makes good money, but is she going to get back to a title fight? But she's not far removed from one. And so that's kind of but that's an interesting question on who's going to face the axe. But
Big Brother's watching, Jeff. You better be careful. Look,
he is watching. You got to watch out. That scares me.
Here comes Marvin Vettori, the winner of the main event tonight.
Or momentarily.
Marvin Vettori, we don't know who that silhouette is. Nice part on that hair, though. That's a really nice part. I like that.
It is a nice part.
But Vettori should be coming momentarily. If you weren't here, Scott Peterson gave us the update from the Apex that he was getting stitches, and he should have been out within 5 minutes. That was a little longer than 5 minutes ago. He won the main event by unanimous decision, going away over Jack Hermansson, the Joker, and it was like 49-46, 49-40. I don't remember the exact scores, but it was all 49-46, 49-45. I think it was 249.
Marvin, congratulations. Obviously a huge for you and just incredible. I'm sure the bruises feel a little worse tomorrow. Give us the idea, what's mentally, physically, what's the feeling like now?
It's good. Like, even the bruises, like, I mean, I enjoy this, So now, man, I know it's tonight, step towards where I was. So it's big. I feel good, man.
To this moment, call for this moment, a ranked guy, main event thing. How did it versus your expectations? The nerve, maybe added pressure, responsibility. How did it feel tonight versus the way you thought it?
Well, sir, I didn't expect him to have in his glove all cut up, and I don't know how. His nails been long. I don't know how it happened. But, No, he came game. Like I dropped. I saw fights before dropped, and he never really came back. I dropped him, and he came back. He was really active hard. He was trying things, shut them off. I him, but I was actually super surprised of his cardio. What the fuck doesn't slow down?
How tough was that first round? I mean, when you cracked him in the first round, the fight might be over, and then you've got to make it right because you don't want to burn out. You've got to save. So, how difficult is that moment to kind of adjustment on the fly?
There were, I think, there's been a few momentum in the fights. The key to this because I topped him, and then for a moment he's like, okay, like like almost like he broke his neck. He's like, okay, yeah, he dropped me. That's what he got. Okay, now it's my turn in a sense. And I felt like I got greedy a little bit. I'm like, fuck, like I want to finish him. And I wanted to finish him. In fact, I remember the whole second round. I'm like, I'm going to crack him again and put him to sleep. But he was active and he came game. And I actually, I have a lot of respect. Like, and then the third, I had a little bit I was also trying to put it good, and I kept going back to I went back to the corner, and I said, I'll be back, because I know it was a little bit of a slow round. And then the fourth and the fifth, I just went out, and I'm like, man, I'm gonna put my feet in the middle of the cage, and there's no way he's gonna push me back, and I did, and I took both rounds. I feel like I landed the most shots, and he couldn't do much, and that's what got me the fight.
You mentioned the third round. That's the only one he took on the scorecards. Obviously, you were preparing for a 3-round fight, so I think a lot of us were thinking, uh-oh, is the cardio gone?
Yeah,
so
no.
Was there like a gut check moment there? Did you have to kind of pull things back together?
I didn't even, like I said it before, I don't think about time. I don't think about referee. Like, it's a fight. It's a fight. If it was no time, it's okay. Like, I don't think about time. I remember being on the fourth, and I'm like, fucking hell, I enjoy this shit. Like, I really enjoy this. I can be here if I have to. And, yeah, man, so I don't think about time. And when I'm in shape, I'm in shape. And, nobody can sprint for five-minute rounds. It's everything is about energy management, And I felt good. I feel good. I can go 10, 15 rounds. So that's it.
Obviously, you guys both knew each other kind of coming up on the European regional scene together and even fighting on the same card. I mean, do you think that's the last time you see Jack Hermansson, or are you guys going to hook it back up again at some point?
If you're I'm going to keep going up. If he gained his shot again, let's do it. I'm the king of Europe today, though.
Very nice. The last thing for me, Dana was in here earlier, and we said, hey, where do you think this puts Marvin? He said, man,
All right, are we live again? I think we are.
Did we lose Jeff?
Grieshaber waiting for Cain to come back. I don't know. Some people haven't heard in the audio of Marvin Vettori. I didn't hear much of what he said. So, Scott, I don't know if you were able to pick up on a lot of it, but I didn't catch really much of what he said at all. So did he say anything that stood out that you heard?
Yeah, he was saying that Israel Adesanya is full of shit. He was going off on him for a bit, but he did say that he would take another fight for interim title if that was necessary. But I was working on some stuff, so I didn't get too many details.
No, that was pretty good though for me to throw you on the spot like that. I didn't even, you did great answering that question because we couldn't hear him, and even in the chat, people were saying there wasn't audio. So I don't know what happened on the end there with the UFC with the mic and everything, but a big win for Vettori, and he literally jumps up from 13, and Dana White says he should be in the top 5 after that. A great performance. The other thing that stood out to me, and this is just a little bit of an analogy for me because I'm always noticing peculiar things like this, Scott, is the marks on his face, man. It looked like he got in a fight with a cat. What did he do? Fight a tiger? They were all it looked like fingernail marks all over his, or gloves with the stitches or something. They didn't look like they were from punches.
Yeah, he was kind of making a funny remark that he brought scissors or knives into the ring with him because he was like, I don't know where these slashes came from on my face, but
yeah, the Jack Hermansson
or he was referring to his fingernails or something.
Yeah, the fingernails, and there was a lot of grappling going on and a lot of close fighting and things like that. But I've actually seen fighters on their way into the cage, when they put the Vaseline on their face and they check their gloves and they check their cup and their trunks and everything before they go in the cage, the inspection, I've actually seen fighters have to get fingernails and toenails clipped before they walked into the cage.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's a real thing. I remember, I think this was after UFC 40 when Ken Shamrock and Tito Ortiz fought. We went to cover. Frank Shamrock was doing a jiu-jitsu seminar, and he makes people cut their fingernails before he'll roll with them.
I don't blame him.
He does, because I guess he gets scratched the shit up. People get excited and nervous and whatnot. I know my wife, scratches the shit out of me, so.
No, it's the beard, Scott. It's the COVID beard, the quarantine facial hair. I love it, man. Well, she doesn't see you that much these days, man. You're always rolling, between Vegas and Utah and going all over the place, man. But and Fight Island this year, what a year it's been. Who would have ever thought Fight Island would ever be a thing before 2020? But it's been an unbelievable ride. And this fight card tonight, for not having that sizzle and down to 8 fights, and I talked about it with Jeff earlier, it's a shorter night for all of us in the media in terms of it starting a little bit later, even though you were probably already there. But the biggest news of the night in the cage was Vettori's performance over Hermansson and, moving up into the top 5 at 185 and talking about Izzy now and wanting to fight Paulo Costa. And none of those things were possible a week ago. He was getting ready to fight Jacare and possibly be another couple of fights away from where he is right now. So Vettori, a big winner, not only on the scorecards tonight, but overall in terms of his career. He couldn't have asked for this to work out any better.
Oh, yeah, big, huge night for him. And, they're shutting everything down. I guess we're going to have to cut this because they're turning off the lights here.
All right, well, that's it. Turn out the lights. The party's over. This is MMA Weekly. I'm Jim Grieshaber for Jeff Cain, for Scott Peterson at the Apex. Thanks for watching. We're going to be doing the weigh-ins and the post-fight press conferences from now on MMA Weekly, the most trusted sport source for news and entertainment in mixed martial arts for almost 20 years. Scott, good night, man. We appreciate it. Thank you all for watching right here on our live stream.